My name's Leszek, and I will be talking with Valeriy Zamaraiev about Web3, crypto networks, and the importance of being result-oriented. So, for the context, I'd like to ask you to share a bit of your professional journey and how you transitioned from maybe more traditional tech roles to CTO at 1KX.
I'm a curious person, an engineer who liked to fiddle with computers since the childhood. I mean, my first programming experience was this in Ukraine and actually in the Soviet Union. It was called Umka. That's like a CPU board that you can actually see the bus lights on bus lines, and you could type in hexadecimal and you could kind of type machine code. And I was just doing hobbyist electronics, and I wanted to program a particular set of codes for doorbell, musical doorbell. And I picked a tune and I translated it to hex. And then I typed all of this, and you could not save it at this machine. So you have to type it and then you write it into ROM. And then you use this ROM in the doorbell. And I did that. And I then discovered that it sounds wrong. And then I was like, okay, what's wrong here? And then I realized that I had the upper bit in every byte inverted in all my table. And I was like, okay, I have to retype all of this. Or there's actually, you can program this thing, and maybe this can do it for me. Maybe I can just invert the bit in all the bytes by writing a small program. But there's like not even assembly language, there's just like a table of hex codes of how machine code works for this thing. And it's Intel 8080 CPU, right? And then I typed that like machine code, and then I ran this thing and it inverted that bit. I wrote this to ROM again. I put this IC chip into my doorbell and it sounded all right. And at that point I realized, okay, that's how programming works. I figured it out. I know everything. I'm the best programmer. That was like the moment when I was, I don't know, 11 or something. And from that point on, I basically knew what I would do in life, right? So everything else is kind of history, like different roles, like technical roles, managerial roles, then back to technical roles, then small companies, large companies, startups, big enterprises, then big tech, crypto. All of that is kind of history. But we can talk more about the journey itself. But that's like in a nutshell, like you just need to have this kind of genuine interest to fiddle with things and then to get some result out of it. Because a lot of people who kind of, they just like fiddling and they are not so much focused on the results. Like I've seen a lot of people who would be kind of, oh, I worked in this amazing startup. We had so much fun. The startup failed, but like we had so much fun. Let's go on to the next one. We don't care. It's like, okay, this one failed. Let's go to the next one. That will fail as well, but like we will have a lot of fun for 2 years, right? So, and that's fine. And they just move on and on and on. And I was always kind of focused a little bit of, okay, yeah, but I do want to have some result. Actually, I do want things to make sense. I think it's these two components.
This approach, it was by nature, or you learn it along the way that like it's not about fun? Because for certain people, it's like it's an education. Being at like big companies like Google, Amazon, it's like they are quite like goal oriented or outcome oriented, and it's just like people learn. Did you have it like from day one that you were sort of this result oriented person, or just out of curiosity?
No, I'd say it was much earlier. Because for me, the result was always important. And I was, like, I always like to be this lazy programmer that's, if you don't have to code it, if you find a way not to code it, like, you don't do it, right? So it's like, and I had these conversations with someone. Well, we are like, for example, there is a system that can be tweaked by changing its configuration file, or you can like rewrite some modules, some code. And I'm like pointing someone to say, we just can reconfigure it a bit. And the person says, well, but I am a programmer. I can kind of do some C++ coding. And I'm like, well, I'm not a sysadmin. I'd rather do that. And I'm like, but that stuff is easier, right? So you just kind of tweak a few lines of config and here you go. And it's not always you see that this mentality is like that. I mean, my mentality has always been like, do more with less.
I'd like to talk a little bit about 1KX and your role as a CTO here. Could you tell us a little bit about the core mission of 1KX and how does it differentiate itself from other venture capital funds in the tech space?
So 1KX is an early stage VC fund focused on crypto networks. And that is basically what it is since 2017. I joined a little over a year ago, and the fund has been supporting some staple projects in the Web3 ecosystem. So, for example, we have Safe, like Gnosis Safe is one of the big positions, like Wallet Connect, like Cow Swap, Arweave, like even other, but that's just not infrastructure. We have, for example, Budget Penguins in our portfolio, right? So various projects, DeFi, NFT, infrastructure, DeBin networks now. So across like crypto ecosystem is pretty much everything. Mm-hmm. Now gaming is becoming a very interesting direction
for you guys.
Autonomous worlds. And I think the major narrative is being like this partner that companies can rely on, the startups can rely on, because the founders have themselves been entrepreneurs before starting the fund. So their mission was like, okay, let's make a VC that's actually useful, you know? And I have pretty good feedback from founders. The best thing that I can experience is then when I'm on a call with the founders, and it's supposed to be kind of a technical due diligence calls or something, and the founders say, well, you know, we are with you because we had very good references, and like in the industry, there is a very good reputation. And sometimes they say like somebody had a good feedback about me for specifically, and that's the best praise that you can get, right? So when in the industry broadly, you have a good reputation, and that's actually the most motivating thing, I would say.
Nice. You mentioned that you want to make a VC company or a fund that is actually useful. In that context, could you share or describe your main responsibilities and how do you contribute, the strategy goals?
With pleasure. So I basically do four things. The major one is portfolio support, right? So we have these companies, and sometimes they need they have varying technical needs. Sometimes there is a gap between multiple portfolio companies, and I can see how they can work together, for example. Sometimes they need some guidance on technical leadership. Sometimes it's a narrow technical problem that I just know from experience of, I don't know, working in previous crypto companies or in big tech or something that I can contribute to. There's a lot of these type of kind of support things. Sometimes we can build something that they cannot for whatever reason, right? Could be interviewing people, right? So sometimes like I'm a secondary interviewer in their recruitment process.
Okay.
Then that's the first thing, that's portfolio support. Then the second thing is internal projects. So we have an internal technical team, and I run this team, and we do internal projects, and the products will be focused on like essentially providing public good. We're not incubating companies within the fund, at least at the moment. We're just focused on improving things in the ecosystem and maybe building something that does not exist. So for example, we will be releasing soon a tool that allows you to observe latencies of different RPC endpoints from across the world. In Berlin last week, we announced that we will be publishing soon zero knowledge module for Gnosis Safe that allows you to sign transactions anonymously. Like you have a list of owners and you see them, you know them, but who exactly signed a particular transaction will be able to kind of hide, because privacy in multi-sig is something that does not exist today, but we are bringing this to the world. And there are sometimes other more internal projects related to kind of internal infrastructure or like infrastructure of our companies. We would run some nodes from these networks just to give them feedback how it all goes. But usually with these projects, there's no goal to make money, because VCs make money in a very different way, right? The goal is to kind of support, again, this whole network. So it's like goes back to the first point of portfolio support. Eventually, internal projects are kind of also aimed at this purpose.
But they're public also, so they contribute to the entire ecosystem.
I mean, there's like internal projects, private is between us and this portfolio company. Okay. That's also kind of, and the fund, it's like a financial institution, if you will. So there's like internal projects that are focused on that, like optimizing internal processes. That's also kind of part of what we do. Then the third thing is, well, technical due diligence. As the new projects come into the pipeline, I just need to kind of have a look at and see if the technology is reasonable. Do I see any red flags? Interview the team, see if people know what they're talking about and things like that. So that's a very typical VC type of stuff, like technical due diligence of all incoming projects, right? That is a big one as well. And sometimes it's critical. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like everything is so obvious that I'm not even involved in those conversations. Sometimes it's like there's not much technical depth, or it's just very obvious that these people are kind of competent. There's no doubt. When there is some additional need or just sanity checking, then I'm involved. And then the fourth thing, and I think this is kind of the major one actually, is just staying on top of everything that's going on in the industry, understanding the trends and just being hands-on in some of those new things that are coming right in the market, and just maintaining the level of expertise across the board. Because when you work on a specific project, you tend to just focus on that and maybe a few adjacent areas, but not really going broad. And here it's important to kind of have some breadth.
Cool. I'd like to do 2 follow-up questions to that. First, I'd like to ask about the staying on top of things thing. Do you, I mean, it's a continuous thing, I can only assume, but do you reserve or book time for staying on top of things?
Very hard. How do you admit, I don't have a recipe. I wish I could do it better. So there's always some kind of a focus area. So I want to learn this, and therefore we may just start some kind of a project with a goal of learning. Right. We have internal hackathons sometimes where we just basically try to use the technology of our portfolio companies. And sometimes the outcome of that is useful and we move forward with it and it gets published.
Like internal project.
Yeah, but I mean, it becomes external. So for example, in gaming, we did a hackathon that later became a separate game, Hexcraft. And the company that's involved in this deployment actually kind of started using this, like what we did in the hackathon and their processes. And that's the kind of portfolio support that they like. Companies like. In other hackathons, it could be like, okay, we did something, we built it, we shelved it, we move forward. But we had so much kind of experience and understanding of the stack that we regard it as super useful for kind of interacting with these companies and for technical due diligence and for future investments. and for portfolio support. So the net outcome is positive even if we shelve that project.
I've heard also another tactic which is interesting for me is that if there's not a possibility to deliver something that is tangible, I mean like a piece of software, people also write essays to have some kind of output. And
Absolutely.
And I'm going to try it. I learned recently about the technique, and I just...
We do that too. Like sometimes there's a blog post. So you kind of research some topic, and then I actually don't do this myself, but like our analysts do this quite often. They would research some topic, they may fiddle with some technology, and then they just write a blog post, right? Because like that's kind of the best use of the time. It's very different from like what I was doing before, when you have a like 2-year roadmap and you have to deliver, and you have to hire people to deliver on this roadmap. You have to coach them, train them. You have to manage the projects. You have to firefight and so on, but you're like laser focused on that goal. I mean, that's obviously one way of doing this when your goal is kind of delivering a specific product. Your goal is broad work across the whole industry. It looks different and different set of challenges.
The second follow-up question is to the portfolio support part. And I'd like to ask you, how does your process look like? How often do you check with those companies? Is it on a regular basis? Basically, how do you approach it? It's very interesting.
Of course, the fund overall has a specific cadence for these interactions, right? So they maintain all the contacts hot, right? Otherwise, it's going to be just some investor update and that's it. Myself specifically, it's more of on like as needed basis. So it's just very informal, like founders and CTOs would ping me on Telegram sometimes, or somebody else in the fund will tell me, hey, we talked with this guy and he wants to talk to you, or and that's happens. So it's more on as needed basis for me, but it doesn't mean that they are kind of left. Like there are people who kind of own all the communication in the fund, that they do their job.
This is all fascinating for me, honestly. Based on your experience, you've been all over the place. You've been around. And what are the key factors you consider when managing scalability, especially in high growth tech environments?
The major challenge is that as the company grows, like at every stage, it has to redefine itself. It's like the people who were most effective when the company is like 5 people could be not the people who are effective when it's 50 and when it's 500. Right? And I can of course say this from the perspective of the fund, like VCs have to be small, right? But like from the previous experience, I don't know, to give a specific example, I joined YouTube when it was like under 1,000 people and maybe even a few hundred, and somehow like it's already a big org, right? But somehow you could remember people's names, right? At least like quite many of them you would remember, who does what in principle. And then as it became like 4,000 engineers, it's a totally different structure with totally different people and totally different management style. I guess this is kind of well known and accepted that things just change when the company grows. I don't think I have been in an environment which grew from, I don't know, organically from like a handful of people to tens of people or hundreds of people. So I've been in organizations of different sizes, but have I experienced this growth with one place? I don't think I have this experience actually. It's always like, yeah, I mean, from there's hundreds to thousands at Google, or like another angle to look at this. Within Google, YouTube is like a few thousand people, right? and it kind of generates a ton of revenue right now for YouTube. And even if when it did not, it was kind of super important. It's like YouTube is super cool product. And then you move to, let's say, Google Cloud, which is tens of thousands of people and, tons of processes. And it was not like generating much, but like it's catching up, right? So it's a totally different culture. It's the same company, different department, absolutely totally different culture. Like absolutely, completely, like different types of people, different types of interviewing, like the job
By
ladders,
design or by evolution?
I think by evolution more, but at some point at Google, they realized that, okay, we can make digital products, but cloud is about selling to enterprise. Can we do enterprise sales? Oh no, we cannot. So we need a different skill set, and that's across the board. Like, how do you do project management? Totally different style. Because like when I was a technical program manager at Google, the thing I used to tell on like trainings for new technical project managers is like, here is a traditional project management role elsewhere, and here is how you do it. Like, we do it in a very unconventional way. And then Google said, you know what, actually for cloud, we want the conventional way. We want people who are certified with PMP, for example, right? Whereas in all the other functions, you don't want these people because they were perceived as too formal, right? So this is the difference in culture. It depends on what the company does. And it's like, if it's the same company, different parts of it, right? And for startups, yeah, I think startups, they also go through some stages. They have to pivot sometimes. And sometimes the growth is also not super successful. I have been in a situation where I had to like lay off most of the company, right? So I was a VP of engineering of a startup, and I had like 33 people under me. And at one point I had to, my boss comes to me and says, like, you can leave 9 people only. And it's like, okay, we have to make these cuts, right? And then of course the culture changed immediately at this point, because that's a totally different situation, right? And in that particular scenario, I realized, okay, if we're doing those cuts, I'm also not needed, right? So probably just go, right? So these happen also not when it grows, but when it shrinks. And sometimes, and like last year, we had to see this as well, right? All the job cuts in tech.
Speaking of that, do you have some kind of rule of thumb or advice how to balance rapid growth versus operational stability, reliability of that sort? There are trade-offs here, and companies at different stages with different objectives maybe do different decisions on the scale of rapid growth versus operational stability, reliability. And what's your take on this?
I think that it depends whether this is a lifestyle business for somebody, which kind of generates some revenue and is kind of established, or is it like a bigger company, or is it a startup? A startup's function is to discover a working business model. So it's by definition in the discovery phase. If it doesn't work, you just need to shut it down, right? So for startups, this definitely, the bias is towards less operational stability, more discovery. Of course, you need to. I think in Web3, this has a specifics though, because when especially the project is financialized, right? When it's people's money at stake, you cannot afford this sometimes. This puts these projects in a very tricky position. Also, when it's infrastructure projects like networks, like main nets, right, test nets, but primarily main nets, or token launches, you only do it once. Like, you cannot iterate, because startups need to naturally iterate. But these projects that launch something with a value attached to it and take public money, and then they work towards this event, either a network launch, which is kind of may not be even a token launch, it can be a separate event, but it's still very hard to undo because like as people start building on this, then they start depending on this. But then especially token launch events, it's like you only launch a token once, right? So this is actually quite tricky because you kind of want to iterate, but you cannot, which I think is the reason why we have so many crypto projects that are kind of zombie projects. So they cannot die, although they should, but they cannot die. And there's some people who are kind of still working on them. Another point related to this is that because these projects tend to have this waterfall style overall, like you have to manage them accordingly. So because it's like a once in a lifetime event, right? One that you have to plan accordingly. You have to manage risks very well. You have to have scope well defined. You have to have like resources assigned. You need to be sure that you have those resources, right? Risks is a separate category, right? So across like just project risks, just not making it right, then quality, security, all of those dimensions, you really need to flesh them out. And that is not consistent, in my opinion, it's not very consistent with what agile practices have been advocating for the last 20 years, because they're basically advocating that you need to kind of push as soon as you have a product that's good enough and then iterate, and then you basically push every day or every week, whatever your cadence is, right? And like you don't do this with crypto networks. You simply cannot do it. Even smart contracts, you cannot do it, right? So smart contracts, it's software, it's supposed to be kind of, but they are either not upgradable, which is then like hardware, like developing smart contracts that are not upgradable is just like hardware. Or if they are upgradable, nevertheless, it's kind of an expensive event in the sense of communication. You need to know that all your community needs to be updated. If there is tooling involved, it also needs to be updated. So making a push to smart contracts is a very expensive event as well. So this is a totally different style.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about it. So you mentioned that it's generally different into context versus the launch. For example, the token launch event, you mentioned the waterfall approach versus agile. But are there any significant differences besides the ones that we talked about in a second between Web3 and traditional tech environments?
Yeah. So I think related to what I said before, security and quality has a huge impact in Web3 because, again, sometimes people say that Web2 will move to Web3 soon. And various projects try to build tooling for more traditional Web2 programmers to move to Web3. And I think that there is a big challenge in this because you cannot, let's say, like traditional enterprise development, what do? Well, they would write some, let's say, Java code for, microservices and stuff like that, right? Or some web apps and so on. Can you imagine moving this to Web3? And the first thing that will happen is like, okay, let's say we found a way to run that Java code on Web3. But their process is like, okay, we push the software out that's good enough, that has some bugs, but like we are ready to fix them. And this just doesn't work on Web3. Because the moment you see this code out, somebody will exploit it. And because the control is decentralized, and sometimes it's not decentralized. In many cases in Web3 projects, they don't start with fully decentralized, which is kind of the right approach maybe. But eventually the goal is to have some kind of community ownership or full decentralization. And there your level of quality and security needs to be so high that the current industry in Web2 is just not used to. It's only like mission critical software that's close to that, but we never call it Web2, right? So
very interesting. On the other hand, I assume that it offers a lot of opportunities compared with some traditional tech. And could you explore it for a second? What are the opportunities here with this technology and this approach?
So the opportunity is, once you figured out like security and reliability, you actually have, like as a platform, blockchain, what is fascinating for me is that it's kind of an unstoppable computer. And when I started my career, at some point I worked at DHL, and what I did there was maintaining a software stack that was designed to run on mainframes. It ran on emulators in my time already, not on mainframes anymore. But you could see that the way it was designed is that the hardware level is supposed to never ever fail, right? So these machines that had everything duplicated, multiple CPUs, one CPU dies, the other kind of can still work. The same with disk. So a lot of redundancy, pretty expensive hardware overall. And we ran it on servers that were kind of very expensive, HP 9000 architecture at that time. And then you look at these kind of big tech startups, on Google, and they said, you know what, we're not doing that. We just assume that hardware always fails. Now, what that leads to is you have to create this layer of handling these failures and these errors, and then you have to create a profession of SRE, software reliability engineer, who kind of looks at the graphs of how many errors do we have in each microservice, and is the error threshold reached? And if it's reached and loaded, we need to do something, and it's actually hard to keep this whole thing running. That's actually a slight digression. I think that AI will not kill us simply because somebody has to keep it running, and it's hard, right? But back to the point of reliability, when you have a blockchain platform running, and it's a quality blockchain platform, then it looks to you then like absolutely reliable hardware, never fails. So in your programming model, you just assume it never fails. It may fail sometimes because like the world is not perfect, right? But like we're getting there where, most popular blockchain platforms, they just run super reliably. So you do not have, like there is DevOps in crypto, of course, because running nodes and all this, but for the smart contract layer, everything that's smart contract based, you don't have anybody who would be looking at alerts, how it's running. Is it like, how many requests per second is my service getting, right? Or something like that. How many failures? Because there are no failures. Like for the network overall, yes, you need to look.
But for the system.
But for your particular dApp, you just put it out and it runs autonomously, lives its own life. That's quite fascinating to me. But you have to pay the price of like making sure the code is right. Well, the other thing is, of course, the openness and kind of opportunity for anybody to build anything. Like basically the projects that we've seen, I don't know, such as Uniswap or something like that, or others, that, somebody can just hack up pretty quickly and the project may grow to amazing TVL numbers just simply because it's like doing something new, and to scale you don't need to do much, right? Because the scalability is taken care of for you by the underlying blockchain, which is itself a problem, like the scalability of blockchains. But there are so many people working on scalability of problems that you as dApp developer don't have to.
I'd like to talk a little bit about leadership. So my first question is, how would you describe your leadership philosophy?
Right. So at some point in my journey, I was like multiple times I had this situation where I'm just a technical guy, but who cares about the delivery? And because some leadership didn't work, I get appointed to kind of, run the project further, mostly early in my career. And in one of those situations, I led the team to deliver the next milestone, and we were so happy that we delivered the project on time, or maybe slightly not on time, but it's okay. And at some point I realized that I'm super happy that we delivered this, but what makes me much more happy, and it was like a new feeling, that I see these people who are happy about this delivery having happened, and I'm more happy for them than for the results. And just that was like this moment, that's a different angle here. Like, caring about these people being happy is actually more important. And I must also say that, through 20 plus years, I had, of course, many projects, and many of those projects I don't remember at all. Like, if somebody tells me, oh yeah, I remember we did something like that, but I remember all the people, a while ago, somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn, and she said, I'm kind of a person from your team from 10 years ago whom you probably don't remember. And I'm like, come on, of course I remember this. What, are you kidding me? But I probably don't remember much about the details of what exactly was done, right? But I definitely remember all the people and all my teams.
Nice. I think that's a great approach. In that topic, I'd like to ask, what are your tactics or strategies for, nurturing the culture in an organization?
Yeah, I think first of all, it has to come really from the top. So you need to check who is is it the founder, CEO, or maybe somebody from the board. Like, if they don't set the tone in this culture, it's going to be an uphill battle. You need to be compatible with this organization yourself first, right? So, and at your level, set example, right? First of all, you need to kind of live this through, and then there has to be a lot of communication. You have to talk about it, because this is not, especially as we work remotely more and more, unless you actually talk about it, it's kind of not obvious, right? And which culture is right, which culture is not right, that's a separate question, because different situations lead to different cultures, and some are more functional, some are less functional, right? But overall, the changes in culture, especially if you want to make changes, right, then there is this model of unfreeze, then change, then freeze, right? So you have to do something that is unconventional, that is disrupting the normal patterns, right? And it might be some reorganizations, or it might be some events or something that actually disrupts the normal flow. And then there is a period of when the new culture is being formed, and it's usually not a simple period. It's okay to have some conflicts. Like, conflict is healthy, right? If you can kind of navigate it. And then as things settle the new way, then you try to kind of freeze it that way, right? So kind of establish the rules, policies, cadence of communication.
But also redefine every now and then once it's growing, right? In reference to, you just said
Yes, that too.
Combine the two, but that would be my takeaway in a way.
Yes, and it's also kind of sometimes the way I've experienced this is sometimes, like in the small to medium companies, this is defined by the person who drives the change. So for instance, as I came to 1KX, before me, one of the GPs was managing the technical team, and then he handed it over to me, and I started doing it a completely different way, right? And he was like, "Oh, okay, that's kind of your thing now. You do it your way, and that's totally fine, right?" So, in many cases, the culture is the function of what I was running.
Thank you very much, Valerie.
Better Tech Leadership powered by Brainhub. Follow Leszek on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Better Tech Leadership newsletter.